Hello and welcome. Radio 4's Saturday Live has had a facelift. Actually, it's now only got one face. Adrian Chiles is the new presenter and he's all on his own. And that's caused quite a stir in the feedback inbox. Also, loads of you have been baffled by the redesign to the layout of BBC Sounds. Why mess with it? Well, we might have got to the bottom of that. And the boy from Macrofelt, who's now the head of the House of Dior in Paris, is nominated for our Interview of the Year.
A very good Saturday morning to you. Adrian Chiles here with Saturday Live. In the next hour, we'll be in the company of the great Michael Rosen, whose A to Z of hope and happiness exactly suits our mood this morning. We'll also have the ghostwriter, who writes the most...
When Saturday Live, that staple of the Radio 4 weekend schedule, returned from a summer break in September, it had a new host, singular. Gone was the cheery double act and, in its place, the distinctive voice of Brummie presenter Adrian Chiles. Saturday Live has had many iterations over the years. It was presented by Richard Coles and Nikki Bedi until the programme moved from London to Cardiff a few years ago. Well, Richard didn't move with it, so his co-host Nikki Bedi continued with a rotation of different co-presenters. At the time, I talked to Richard Coles on feedback and to Colin Patterson, who's head of audio for BBC Wales and West of England, about the move and what it meant for the show. Well, Colin's back and I'll be asking him about this latest version of Saturday Live. But first, here's what listeners think.
My name is Andy in West Sussex. I have been a listener to Saturday Live for some years. I have especially enjoyed it for the spark of Nikki Bedi plus her various co-presenters. With all due respect to Adrian Chiles, who I do not dislike and happily listen to on Radio 5 Live, with him presenting on Saturday morning, Saturday Live has become anodyne, just another programme, sadly. And I, for one, no longer listen.
Hello, I'm Vivian Brown from Stratford-upon-Avon. Just so thrilled to find that you've engaged Adrian Chiles to present Saturday Live. I've not been to Saturday Live listener in the past, but I'm certainly going to be listening to Adrian. He's just such an intelligent, grounded and popular bloke. Absolutely love him.
Avril Levi from London. I was late to the new format with Adrian Chiles as I'd been away, but I'm now really enjoying listening. He comes across as genuinely empathetic and humble, more interested in his guests than himself.
Well, Saturday Live has been made in Cardiff for the last few years, and so the man responsible is Colin Patterson, head of BBC Audio for BBC Wales and the West of England. And I'm delighted to say he's with me now. Colin, welcome back to Feedback.
Thank you.
Colin, what prompted this change? I mean, I wonder if you felt the programme wasn't working after you lost Richard Coles as a presenter and the programme moved to Cardiff.
No, not at all. I mean, as many people will remember for the last time I spoke to you on Feedback, that this is a conversation that's been happening for a number of different years, going as far back as 2022, when the decision was made to move a number of different programmes outside of London as part of the BBC's across the UK strategy. And so Saturday Live was one of the programmes that was earmarked to move, and the decision was made to move it to Cardiff. And at that point, there was a conversation with the presenters at the time, which was Richard Coles and Nikki Bedi. And you remember from our previous conversation that Richard made the decision that he wouldn't move to Cardiff, but Nikki kindly agreed to stay on and present the programme during a transition period. And so Nikki's been presenting the programme for the last 2 years, but it was never the plan for her to be presenting the programme long term. So this isn't about one presenter over another. It's a long conversation that's taken place over 3 years. And we've now got to the position where Adrian Chiles has taken up the presenting.
I think some listeners might be a little bit surprised to realise that the last 2 years were just a transition period. Can I ask you why you didn't want Nikki to present from Cardiff?
Well, it was more about Nikki as well. So Nikki is London-based, so the conversation was always about trying to find presenters that were based in that location or willing to present from those locations. And I suppose the long transition period speaks to how much we care for these programmes and how much we think about them, that we want to get the presenter right. We've spent a long time listening to the audience, including focus groups. And so both in terms of the type of presenter that people wanted to hear on a Saturday morning and also the type of guests and what they valued most about the programme, it's given us a real opportunity to think about what Saturday Live should be in the future. And that's hopefully what we're now developing with Adrian.
Well, that's really interesting. So you did listen to listeners' comments and do audience research and feedback, and that did play into your decision to change from 2 presenters on a Saturday morning to just one.
If you think of the range of people that have presented Saturday mornings on Radio 4, and we take that right back to John Peel and the days of Home Truths, we looked at a different range of styles and different people that could do that and asked the audiences about it. We also looked at the format, and I think the length of the programme has also changed at various points over the year. So it's now gone down to an hour. So that was part of the decision about, do we need 2 presenters? I think the other thing that's clear from the focus groups and the audience research is the things that people value most from Saturday Live is amazing stories that they haven't heard before. And we wanted to create as much room for that as possible. And clearly, just with the logistics of a programme, if you've got 2 presenters, then that's more airtime. So part of it was about the choice of the presenter, but part of it is about the focus. And as I say, whether it's celebrities or whether it's, inverted commas, real people, what people value most from Saturday Live is amazing stories.
The reason I'm a little bit surprised is that the decision to have just one presenter has actually upset a lot of our listeners.
I'm Ken Bluestone, and I'm from Petersfield, Hampshire. This is the first time I'm writing to BBC Feedback, but felt I had to register my dissatisfaction with the new format of Saturday Live. You have stripped it of all that was interesting in the programme. The casual interplay and dialogue between presenters, the humorous banter with the guests. Even the section on thank yous has become a boring interview instead of the lovely, person-focused first-person narrative it was originally. Sadly, this part of the Radio 4 programming that was until now a staple of my weekend listening holds no interest. I would be grateful if you could return to the original format and bring the wonderful people back in the studio who made it so special.
Hello, my name is Carmen Woodhope, and I live in Salford in Greater Manchester. I'm writing as a dedicated listener of BBC Radio 4 programmes. One of my favourites is Saturday Live, until now. There are no bants, no gentle laughter, no insight. I'm begging you, restore my inner calm and enjoyment and replace Adrian Chiles with someone calm, chatty, confident, and easy to listen to with a nimble and curious brain.
Hi, I'm Nikki Vanderwert from Farnham in Surrey. I've listened to Saturday Live for years and really enjoy it. I do question your decision, though, to only have one presenter now. The whole thing has lost the friendliness and natural discussion vibe. This is no criticism of Adrian Chiles at all, but I feel the presenters used to bounce off each other really well. Nikki Bedi brought humour to everything. I will still listen, but it really isn't as enjoyable as it used to be.
Nicola Vanderwert speaks for many when she says that the whole thing has lost the friendliness and natural discussion vibe. And we've got listeners complaining that it's more boring in this format, which is clearly not what you wanted.
Well, one person's boring is another person's interesting. And I think, look, we have listened. Clearly, we are in the first 2 months, so the programme is going to evolve and change over time. Some of this is a reflection on the scale of the programme. You know, it has 1.7 million listeners every week listening live. So that's going to be a broad church of people who are going to have different tastes and approach to their listening. But as I say, for all of us, for myself, for the programme team in Cardiff, for Adrian as presenter, what you do on week 1 is not where you'll end up at the end of your first year. So there will be developments. But at the same time, we have sat back, listened and thought about it. And as I say, we have made changes, and that is to try and focus on what the audience told us they wanted most. And that's not necessarily more from presenters. It is about, on Radio 4, depth, thoughtfulness. And that's not to say that that's not without humour, but the main focus is around people's stories.
Adrian Chiles is obviously a very well-known presenter, but his presentation style has divided listeners' opinion in our inbox. So there are listeners who think that he's empathetic and humble. Of course, there are those who just don't like his style, but there are those who like him elsewhere and don't think that he's right for this role. Why did you think that he was the best choice for Saturday Live?
What Adrian brings you is somebody who's absolutely dedicated to the cause. The amount of time he spends with guests before programmes, the amount of thought that he puts in working with the team, getting the questions right, getting the angles right. We've got to think about ourselves in the portfolio of BBC radio stations. You know, you've got Radio 2 that's doing big personalities and big guests. You've got the commercial sector that are doing a lot of the same. So what's Radio 4's role in this? And I go back to, again, you know, we spent so much time talking to people about this and to say, what is it you value most? And the thing they value most is amazing stories they hadn't heard anywhere else. And so what we were then seeking is the person that can best bring out those stories.
That's so interesting because there's been quite a lot of criticism from listeners that all the fun is gone. It's a word that I've seen again and again in listener comments, fun, that banter that's disappeared from Saturday mornings. And I suppose what you're saying is, like, if that's what you want, go and listen to Radio 2 or listen to a commercial radio station. We're giving you something different now.
I don't know whether I would quite put it that way. I think that Adrian has a very dry sense of humour, so I would sort of take issue with the fact that it's not fun. It's different, you know, and we loved working with Nikki Bedi, who's a fantastic broadcaster. And as I say, this isn't about one personality versus another. That was always part of the discussion and part of the plan. And Adrian is very different to that. But I think there is a lot of humour in there, and there's a lot of fun. And I hope that if audiences stick with the programme, they'll hear more of that in time.
You mentioned that Nikki Bedi, the previous presenter, was London-based. The last time you were on Feedback, you said that Saturday Live was going to have more of a Welsh feel, now that it came from Cardiff. But of course, Adrian Chiles isn't Welsh in any way, shape or form. He's very clearly a Brummie presenter. So have you decided to ditch the Welsh bit?
Not at all. I think what I said was that we were open to the Welshness. And I think that, by moving programmes across the UK, it doesn't all of a sudden mean that you're going to be opening with Land of Our Fathers and a rendition of Tom Jones every week. These are about subtle changes that improve the representation for audiences across the UK. It improves the creative investment that the BBC makes to people across the UK for licence fee payers, allows people to develop their careers outside of London. So those are all the benefits. We have had Welsh presenters on the programme over the last 2 years, people like Hugh Stevens and Jason Mohammed and Kiri Pritchard-McLean. And again, this is not an either or. This is, we want the best people, we want the right people, and we are producing a range of programmes here in Cardiff. You can listen to Hugh Stevens live from Central Square in Cardiff every afternoon on 6 Music. So this isn't about one programme and one presenter. It's also, you'll tell from my accent, that I'm not from Wales, and yet I live here, I work here, and I make my life here. And so we can be cliched about it, but it was about having a Welsh base and a Welsh-based production team with all the benefits that I've described.
Colin, new presenters often take a while to bed in, and you're probably used to complaints when familiar presenters are changed. So I wonder how you're going to measure success with this new programme. Is it going to be audience comments and listener research? Is it about ratings? How will you know if it works?
I mean, I think there's probably 4 main things in my head. One is the verbatim comments, and I would say Radio 4 audiences, as you know, are never backwards and coming forwards in terms of the feedback. So that's certainly one. And we do take that really seriously. I don't want to be glib about it being subjective. We do genuinely read the comments that come in and take that very seriously. The other 2 is really about the data. So Radar, which is the industry standard in terms of live radio listening, that's one way of measuring it. We also can monitor BBC Sounds statistics in terms of how people are listening online. And I would say that's been very encouraging in terms of growth during the time that Adrian has been on air. And then the 4th is just broader research. We've talked about, we've already conducted other surveys with the audiences and focus groups. And I think a mix of those 4 things is how we continue to review it.
Well, Colin Patterson, thank you very much. And of course, you can hear Saturday Live at 9 o'clock in the morning on Radio 4 and also on BBC Sounds anytime. If you'd like to comment on anything you've heard on any of the BBC's radio stations or Sounds or any BBC podcast, then please do get in touch. The simplest way is to send a voice note using WhatsApp. The number is 03 333 444 544. And you can ring the same number and leave a voice message. The number again, 03 333 444 544. On X and Instagram, it's at BBC R4 Feedback, and you can send an email to feedback@bbc.co.uk. And please do go to BBC Sounds. You can search for Feedback, click like and subscribe so you get every episode in your feed and you can listen whenever you like. Now, last week I talked to the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason. He was responding to listeners' comments about what they called the disproportionate coverage of Reform UK and Nigel Farage on the BBC. It was a very honest and forthright interview, the kind I'm sure he wishes he got from most of the people he interviews. And Chris stressed that we're at an extremely unusual place in politics in Britain today.
What has happened in the last 12 months, Andrea, is a change in our politics that we haven't seen in decades. And it is something that I and the team I'm a part of are working our way through every day. How do we calibrate this new politics where you have an insurgent party with a very small number of MPs, but is performing consistently in the opinion polls ahead of everyone else, has also got the beginnings of an electoral track record, the by-election and the local elections in England of a couple of months ago, and indeed local authority by-elections since then, that suggests there is something in that opinion poll performance. We have to reflect that, but it is new and uncharted territory that we are feeling our way through.
Well, that interview generated a lot of interest from listeners.
My name is Ian Arnott from Peterborough. I've just heard Chris Mason defending the amount of coverage that Nigel Farage and Reform are given on the BBC because they are making the political weather. So it seems that the more outrageous and controversial politicians are, then the BBC more or less guarantees them a platform, regardless of the harm that their remarks may do. In my opinion, the BBC's defence that they are just reporting what is going on is specious. You seem to be drawn to controversy just because, in your view, it will make more exciting viewing or listening, and you hope this will attract more viewers or listeners, regardless of the content of what you're reporting on.
Hello, Feedback. This is Rosemary Leadbeater from Banbury in Oxfordshire. When asked about the inconsistencies between seats in Parliament and party coverage generally, Chris Mason suggested that the BBC aimed to report on the changing mood of the people. Yes, I'm sure this is true, but also, Nigel Farage, whether love him or loathe him, is not a boring man. He attracts interest, and sometimes agitation, in what he says and how he says it. Therefore, he is good for the viewing, listening figures.
Hello there, this is Oliver Waywell from Stokesley, North Yorkshire. I was listening to feedback concerning the alleged over-coverage of reform by the BBC and Chris Mason's very polite response to the criticisms. Speaking as someone who has voted for 3 different parties during the course of my life, I can tell you with confidence that voters of all political parties believe that the BBC is biased against the party of their choice. This is natural. The viewer is the one that carries the bias, and will quite obviously perceive the BBC's normally neutral stance as negative bias.
If you'd like to hear the whole interview with Chris Mason in last week's programme, it's available on BBC Sounds. Now, there has been a lot of comments over the last few weeks about some issues listeners have experienced with the new BBC Sounds website layout.
Peter Covell from Churchtown. My preferred method of listening to a previously broadcast Radio 4 programme is to select it from the schedule in a web browser on Android and listen now. Until a few days ago, a play icon showed and BBC Sounds offered itself with a close button, which I selected. I then had a time bar with start and end times, a play pause button, 20 seconds forward backward buttons, and the ability to place the cursor anywhere on the time bar, all very convenient. Now BBC Sounds takes over immediately with no time bar, no control over the playing, except pause. Useless.
Hello, my name is Shirley Goodwin and I live in Guildford in Surrey, and I'm ringing to say how disappointed I am with the new BBC Sounds layout. It's less clear and it's definitely not user-friendly. Who on earth thought this would be an improvement? So I'm very disappointed with this, and as a lifelong user of Radio 4 and Radio 4 Extra, please can you sort this technical issue soon?
I'm Malcolm Shine from Barnt Green in North Worcestershire. I'd like to know what's the point of the recent update to BBC Sounds. When listening at home on computer, it now only allows me to play or pause. Previously, when listening to a 2-hour programme, like Sounds of the 70s, I could skip the week-old news bulletin halfway through. On Radio 4 programmes, I could jump back to a section I wanted to hear again, maybe for contact details or the address of a useful website. It's clearly a retrograde step and hopefully will be quickly reversed.
Hi, I'm Stephen Laney from Croydon. What the hell has the BBC done with the new format of the BBC Sounds player? Where has the slider gone to allow moving forwards and backwards through a programme? This applies to listening live or to an earlier, later or archive programme. Subsequently, a few days later, whilst actually listening to feedback, I found out where these controls have been moved to. But absolutely no information was supplied about this, no note, no pop-up window to tell us how this works.
Well, feedback has had so many comments, we asked BBC Sounds to look at what the problem could be, and also why they had changed the layout in the first place. Here's the response from a BBC spokesperson.
We recently updated the BBC Sounds website so that you can keep listening while browsing other content on BBC Sounds. Previously, programmes would stop playing if you navigated away from the play page, which people found frustrating.
I'm sure they did. A good move. But what about the functions people say they can't find anymore?
The ability to rewind live shows or fast forward through on-demand programmes is still there. These buttons have moved to a new player at the bottom of the page. This experience has been available on the BBC Sounds mobile and tablet app for some time, and feedback we have received at BBC Sounds has been very positive. We've now brought that same design to the website for a more consistent experience. We will continue listening to audiences' feedback to make BBC Sounds the best it can be.
So basically the website has now caught up with the app. Good to know. But if that's not your experience, well, you know what to do. Do get in touch. The nice people at BBC Sounds have got very used to hearing from the feedback team. Now, competition is hotting up in Feedback's annual search for the best interview across all forms of BBC audio. That's radio and podcasts, to find the one that is most deserving of the title Interview of the Year. I'll be announcing the winner in a special programme around Christmas, and that winner will be chosen by a panel of listeners. Well, this week, listener Leslie McCauley got in touch to nominate John Wilson's recent interview with Northern Ireland fashion designer Jonathan Anderson in This Cultural Life. Well, Jonathan has recently been appointed creative director at fashion brand Christian Dior. But as you'll hear, this couldn't be further from his early life, growing up in a village near the market town of Magherafelt in mid-Ulster during Northern Ireland's decades of conflict, euphemistically known as the Troubles. Here's why it gets Leslie's nomination.
I'm Leslie McCauley from Portstewart in Northern Ireland. I would like to say how wonderful and engaging the interview with Jonathan Anderson was on This Cultural Life with John Wilson.
Welcome to This Cultural Life, the series in which some of the world's leading creative people choose the most important influences and experiences that have inspired their own creativity. I'm John Wilson, and my guest in this episode is...
I found the interview intriguing, as Jonathan himself is quite an elusive person, and opening up about his rural background in Northern Ireland was particularly fascinating, as I know the area he grew up in.
I wouldn't be where I am today without Northern Ireland. Anywhere where you grow up tells you who you want to be, or tell you what you want to escape from.
It is not often I hear stories from my part of the world included in interviews like this, so I found this particular interview fascinating and relatable.
We didn't have high fashion in the house, but, you know, I became quite obsessed by it.
But you were living next door to your grandfather's farm, weren't you? So, I mean, I presume a lot of the time it was wellies and jeans and overalls.
It's a very, very different thing.
John Wilson's interviewing skills got Jonathan to open up about his thoughts growing up in the Troubles.
You become immune to it, if that means it. You were born into it, you're immune to it.
Were you aware of danger and violence?
Yeah, of course. You know, I saw many things in life that I wish I never saw. In Macclesfield, I remember when you went to school and the next day the entire street was gone. You know,
and the profound moment that the Oma bomb could have almost claimed his mother's life.
My mother had gone to return shoes in Oma, and she gets to the bottom part of the town and has the car parked at the other top of the street. And she then went up in the place where you can't go to the top because there's a bomb at the top. And my mother's like, well, I need to get home. Like, I've got my things. And she goes through Woolworths, gets into the car. And as she's driving off, the side of the town that she was in completely evaporated.
This is the Oma bomb.
Yeah.
There was obvious respect between the interviewee and the interviewer throughout the interview. I loved how John got Jonathan to explain his thought process in designing a new collection, especially when Jonathan said it has to turn you on.
So it weirdly, you know, when you're designing a collection, it's like being in like a debate class. You're kind of debating with each other because you could do 100 looks in one day of trying different things on, and it might be only 2 looks where you're like, there is something there that we feel that we can explore further.
And how do you know what that something is? It's just instinctive, is it?
I think it's just, you know, I always think, does it turn you on?
His personality came across as someone grounded, logically focused, hardworking and considered.
And on a personal level, at the top of the programme, I bill you as probably the most important fashion designer in the world right now. So at that pinnacle, what drives you on creatively?
That you never get there, somehow. For me, what drives me every morning is that it can always be better.
I would like to nominate this interview for Interview of the Year, as I believe it deserves to be recognised further.
Well, thank you, Leslie Macaulay, for putting that forward. It is an excellent interview and one that I shared with lots of family and friends. And if you hear an interview across BBC Audio which stands out for you, please do let me know. On next week's feedback, I'm going to be talking to the commissioning editor of Comedy and Entertainment about an episode of Call Jonathan Pye, which was broadcast last Thursday. Now, you've been contacting feedback in droves to complain that you thought it wasn't suitable for the 6:30pm slot on Radio 4. And also just to warn you that if you are now curious and you want to have a listen, the version on BBC Sounds isn't the one that was broadcast on Radio 4 because the strongest language and subject matter was edited for transmission. Well, more on that next week. But for now, thank you.